They thought it was just a smudge, just a faded pattern on the inside of her lunchbox, worn down by years of sandwich bags and juice boxes. But it wasn't. Not to her. Not to Madeline Connor. Not to the 9-year-old who sat quietly at table 7 every day while the cafeteria buzzed like a hive around her. That wasn't a smudge, it was a flag. And if you tilted it just right in the sun, you could still make out the shape of the eagle and the letters that read "Proud to Serve." Some kids saw stickers of cartoon characters. Others had glitter or superheroes. But Madeline carried a story no one asked her about. Because when you're small and quiet and your father's face looks like it lost a battle with fire, people choose not to ask. If you believe scars should be honored, not hidden, if you believe courage isn't always loud, then like and subscribe, because this story, this one needs to be remembered. It began, as stories like this often do, with a whisper in the hallway. Tyler Morgan, self-declared class comedian, cocked his head toward Madeline as she passed and said, loud enough for others to hear, "That's the girl with the zombie dad." Laughter followed. Not all at once, not a roar, but the snickering kind, the under-the-breath kind, the kind that cuts without ever using a blade. Madeline didn't stop walking. She didn't cry. She just hugged her lunchbox tighter against her chest and kept her eyes on the floor. But make no mistake, she heard it. Every syllable. That morning in class, her teacher, Miss Pinley, introduced a writing prompt. What makes someone brave? The room filled with the sound of pencils tapping desks, kids scratching their heads, and one girl in the back confidently announcing her answer was going to be Spider-Man. But Madeline already knew her answer. She just wasn't sure anyone else would understand it. At recess, it got worse. Tyler and a few of his friends had drawn a picture in chalk near the hopscotch lines. Crudely drawn flames, a stick figure with "Dad" scribbled underneath. One boy fake limped past her, dragging his leg like a cartoon soldier. "Hey, Maddie, does your dad glow in the dark now?" he said with a sneer. She didn't respond. She sat under the metal slide, legs pulled in, lunchbox pressed to her stomach like armor. Nobody stopped them. Not the kids, not the aides, not even the teachers, though one of them must have seen it. That's the thing about small cruelties. People pretend they're invisible when they don't want to be bothered. That night, she didn't say much at home. Her dad, Sergeant Noah Connor, was sitting on the porch like always, a blanket over his lap, scars climbing his cheek like burnt rivers toward his temple. One eye cloudy from the blast, the other still as sharp and blue as it ever was. He didn't ask her how school was. He never did. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew, deep down, that when she was ready, she'd tell him. Instead, he tapped the armrest next to him. She climbed up without a word. They sat in silence for a while, the wind rustling the dry leaves at their feet. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper crane. "Found this tucked in my gear," he said, handing it to her. "Made it the night before I left Kandahar. Thought it'd get torn up, but it made it home, just like I did." She nodded, carefully cradling the crane in her palms like it might fly away if she blinked. "Do people ever forget?" she asked quietly. He didn't look at her. He looked at the setting sun. Sometimes they don't even try to remember. The next day, her mom came home early, earlier than expected. Lieutenant Commander Dana Connor, Naval Intelligence. She didn't wear her uniform often, not outside of base, not unless it was required. But this time she did. And when she walked into the kitchen, Madeline stared at the row of ribbons across her chest like she was seeing them for the first time. Her mom took one look at her and said, "Tell me what happened." Madeline hesitated, then told her everything. The drawings, the names, the way the teachers didn't look. Her mother didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Okay," and kissed her forehead. That Friday, Westbrook Elementary announced their monthly school-wide assembly. The theme? Respect and responsibility. Irony doesn't knock when it enters. It simply sits in the front row and waits. Madeline filed in with the others, taking her usual seat near the back. Her mom, Dana, stood near the side of the stage, clipboard in hand, listed as a special guest speaker no one knew much about. The principal fumbled through his notes, said something about community values, and then invited her forward. And when Lieutenant Commander Dana Connor stepped onto that stage, pressed uniform, sharp salute, ribbons glinting under fluorescent lights, you could feel the shift in the air. Like someone had opened a window in a room no one realized was stuffy. She didn't talk about discipline or military tactics. or medals. She talked about scars. She talked about a man who came home with half his face changed, but his heart untouched. About a daughter who sat quietly while others laughed, who knew more about strength than half the adults she'd met. She told the truth, and when she was done, she looked toward the back of the room and said, "My husband didn't earn his scars on accident. He earned them saving 4 men from a burning truck after an IED tore their convoy apart. He stayed inside when the flames reached his legs. He walked out carrying someone else." Then she paused. "So the next time you see a scar, ask yourself what it cost to get it." The auditorium didn't clap right away. They just sat there, the silence stretching deep. Then, slowly, hands came together. And Madeline, for the first time that week, smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, they were finally starting to see. They didn't talk about it much after the assembly, at least not in front of adults. Kids rarely do when the truth hits harder than their jokes. But something had shifted that day, something quiet, like a page turning when no one was looking. Madeline noticed it first when she walked into the lunchroom on Monday, and no one was sitting in her usual spot at the edge of table 7, where she always sat alone. Instead, 2 kids had left space beside them, and when she hesitated, unsure if the invitation was real, a girl named Chloe scooted over and said, not loudly but clearly, "You can sit here if you want." That small sentence rang louder than the assembly applause. The drawing on the playground had been washed away in the rain, but Tyler and his friends hadn't said anything to her since. No zombie jokes, no mimicked limps, not even sideways glances. And while they didn't apologize, they had started looking at her differently. Not like she was strange or breakable, but like maybe there was more to the story they never bothered to ask about. At home, Sergeant Noah Connor still sat on the porch, blanket over his lap, bird feeders swinging lightly in the breeze, and Madeline, who usually sat in silence beside him, finally broke it with a question, "Did it hurt?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and yet the air around them stilled like even the leaves were listening. Her dad didn't answer right away. He stared out at the horizon the way he always did when his mind wandered to places his body never would again, and after a long pause he said, "Yes, but not the way you think." She didn't press. She just leaned into his side, her cheek resting against the crisp patchwork of his uniform jacket, the fabric worn thin where he always kept his hand folded in thought. That week, Dana was called back to base, her leave over, but before she left, she pulled Madeline in close and said, "When people are cruel, it's because they're trying not to feel small, but the strongest people I've ever met never raised their voices. They just stood taller." And Madeline carried that with her like a new kind of armor, not the kind that protected her from being hurt, but the kind that reminded her she didn't have to be invisible. One afternoon, while organizing the art cabinet in the classroom, Miss Pinley knelt beside her and said, quietly, "I didn't do enough. I should have said something when they teased you." Madeline blinked in surprise, the apology landing somewhere unexpected. "It's okay," she replied, but her teacher shook her head. "It's not, but I'll do better." And for the first time, it felt like the adults were starting to understand, too. By Friday, Madeline's writing piece from the bravery prompt was taped to the hallway wall. It wasn't flashy. No colors or borders or stickers. Just a page titled "My Dad's Face." The first sentence read, "His scars don't scare me. They tell me who he is." And beneath that, in crooked but confident handwriting, was a story about a man who didn't run, a man who walked back into fire because others couldn't, a man who came home carrying pain, but also courage. Students passing by paused to read it. One even whispered, "That's her dad," with a softness that didn't sound like mockery anymore. And then, one afternoon as Madeline zipped up her backpack to leave, someone tapped her shoulder. Tyler, awkward and red-faced, holding a folded drawing. "I made this," he mumbled, handing her a sketch of a soldier with a cape made of stars. She didn't say anything, just nodded. And for a moment, the boy who used to call her dad a monster waited there, quietly, as if standing beside her might somehow make up for the words he couldn't take back. That evening, Sergeant Connor stood at the kitchen counter, turning the drawing over in his hand. "Looks like I've got a cape now," he said, a crooked smile bending the edge of his scar. Madeline laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it sounded like childhood again. It happened a month later on Hero Day, one of those feel-good elementary school events where kids dress up as someone they admire. and everyone's expected to wear capes or lab coats or toy stethoscopes. But when Madeline Connor walked into school that morning, she didn't wear any of those things. Instead, she wore her dad's oversized field jacket, sleeves rolled 3 times over, the fabric still smelling faintly of metal, dust, and pine soap, and taped across her chest, over her heart, was a paper name tag that read simply, "My hero lives at home." The teacher smiled, some looked away with watery eyes, and no one laughed. Not even Tyler, who showed up in a store-bought Superman costume but kept adjusting his cape like it suddenly didn't fit. During the assembly, kids were invited to stand and share who they came as. Some shouted out cartoon names. Others giggled through stories of a brave aunt or a cool big brother. But when it was Madeline's turn, she stood slowly, jacket swaying past her knees. And for a moment, she just stood there, eyes scanning the crowd like she was searching for something invisible. Then, with a voice steady as stone, she said, "My hero is my dad. He doesn't wear a cape. He wears skin that hurts when the weather changes, and eyes that see too much, and a heart that never stops carrying people, even when it hurts him. Some people say he looks scary, but I think scary is forgetting who kept us safe." The room didn't make a sound. No clapping, no shifting, just silence, full and wide, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. And then, someone at the back, small, hesitant, began to clap. Then another, until the whole room was applauding, not wildly, not out of duty, but from somewhere real. Later that day, the principal pulled Madeline aside and asked if they could frame her paper and hang it in the main office. She nodded quietly. That evening, when she handed her dad a photo someone had taken of her speech, he held it in his hands for a long time before saying, "I thought I'd be remembered for the things I did out there. I never expected to be remembered for what I am to you." And when he said that, something in Madeline settled deep and permanent, like a root finally finding soil. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. Some of the kids who once teased her started asking questions instead. Did it hurt? Was he scared? And when she answered, she didn't use the word brave like a costume anymore. She used it like a memory. And one crisp morning near the end of the school year, a delivery truck pulled up to the front office. Inside, a custom plaque ordered by the PTA, engraved with gold foil and shaped like a folded flag. It read, "Honor begins at home." Dedicated to Sergeant Noah Connor and the families who wear scars too. The entire school gathered as it was mounted outside the front office, and someone, no one knows who, tied a small, paper crane to the bottom hook, flapping gently in the wind. Sergeant Connor never liked ceremonies. He didn't even attend. But the next day, before sunrise, Madeline saw him standing at the edge of the school lawn, coffee in one hand, blanket in the other, just looking. And though no one else was there to see it, she watched from the window as he saluted the plaque, slowly, reverently. Not for recognition, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Not as a scar, but as someone who never stopped standing.